Late December 2015. It's colder than usual that year near the Cascades, heavy snow stacking up against the old cabin. My name's Owen, and I used to work for the Forest Service. I still can't shake what happened that winter. I know what you're thinking when you hear Bigfoot. Trust me, I get it. I didn't believe in any of that stuff either. But what I saw, what I had to do. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't some prank. I found it lying in the snow after the worst blizzard we'd had in 20 years, half frozen, barely breathing. I should have called someone. Fish and Wildlife, the ranger station, somebody. But I didn't. I dragged it into my barn and spent 3 days keeping it alive. I had footage on my phone, clear as day, but I erased it. I couldn't risk what would happen if hunters found out. The whole thing's a mess, and I'm still not sure I did the right thing, but I know what I saw, and I know I couldn't just leave it there to die. Life was simple back then. It wasn't the happiest, but it was routine. Cold mornings by the fire, hot coffee, the familiar creak of the floorboards under my boots. No surprises. My dog, Charlie, was my closest company. He never seemed to mind the quiet or the isolation. The cabin sat about 40 miles from the nearest town, tucked against the tree line where the forest started its long climb toward the peaks. The road in was gravel, winding, prone to washing out in heavy rains. Cell service was a joke out there. You got used to being alone. I'd worked for the Forest Service for almost 15 years by then. Trail maintenance, wildlife surveys, fire prevention. Honest work that kept me outside and away from people, and which suited me fine. My ex-wife had taken our daughter south after the divorce. I stayed because I didn't know where else to go. The cabin was mine, paid off, sturdy. It had everything I needed. That December started normal enough, cold, but manageable. I spent my days cutting firewood, checking the propane tank, making sure the roof could handle the snow we knew was coming. Charlie and I would walk the property line every morning, him sniffing at deer tracks, me checking for downed branches or signs of bears getting too comfortable near the barn. People in town had mentioned strange things happening in the woods that fall, livestock going missing, odd sounds at night. A few folks claimed they'd seen large footprints near the ridge trails. At the general store, someone would always bring up Bigfoot, half joking, half serious. I'd smile and nod, but never gave it much thought. I'd been in these woods my whole adult life and never seen anything I couldn't explain. But that year felt different. The forest was quieter than usual. Fewer deer, fewer birds. Even the crows seemed nervous, staying high in the trees instead of scavenging near the cabin. Charlie noticed it too. He'd stop on our walks, ears up, staring into the timber for minutes at a time. I'd whistle him back and tell myself it was just the season. Animals get skittish before big weather. The wind had a different quality that year. Sharper, more insistent. The trees seemed to lean away from something I couldn't see. At night, lying in bed, I'd hear the forest settling in strange ways. Not the usual creaks and groans, but something else. Something that made Charlie's ears prick up even in his sleep. I was wrong about all of it. The Weather Service started issuing warnings in mid-December. A massive storm system was moving down from Canada, expected to dump 3 to 4 feet of snow across the Cascades over a 72-hour period. Winds up to 70 miles per hour. Temperatures dropping below zero. They called it a once-in-a-decade event. I'd been through bad storms before, but the urgency in the forecaster's voice made me take it seriously. I spent 2 days preparing, stacked firewood on the porch, filled every container I had with water in case the pipes froze, moved the generator into the mudroom, and brought in extra feed for Charlie. I checked the barn, made sure the doors were secure, cleared space inside in case I needed to shelter livestock, though I didn't have any, just habit from the old days. And I drove into town one last time before the storm hit. The general store was packed. Everyone had the same idea: stock up, hunker down, wait it out. I grabbed batteries, canned goods, extra propane canisters. The woman at the register, Linda, rang me up and said, "You be careful out there, Owen. It's supposed to be a bad one." "Always am," I said. She looked at me with that expression people get when they're about to say something they think you won't believe. My cousin saw something up on Ridge Road last week. Big tracks, really big. Said they didn't look like bear. I nodded politely. Probably just a big buck. They get huge up here. "Maybe," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. The storm hit on December 18th. I remember the date because it was my daughter's birthday. I'd tried calling her that morning, but the line was already down. The wind picked up around noon, and by evening the snow was falling so thick I couldn't see the tree line from the porch. The cabin groaned under the pressure. I kept the fire going, the shotgun by the door, and Charlie close. The power went out around midnight. For 3 days the world outside was nothing but white noise and darkness. The wind screamed through the eaves. Snow piled up past the windows on the north side. I burned through half my firewood just keeping the main room warm. Charlie and I slept in shifts, though I'm not sure why. There was nothing to do but wait it out. The storm had a rhythm to it. Waves of intensity followed by brief, eerie calms. During one of those calms on the second night, I thought I heard something. A sound underneath the wind. Deep and resonant, like a horn blown far away. I went to the window and looked out, but there was nothing, just swirling white and darkness. On the third night, I heard it again, but this time it was closer, and it sounded like pain. I tried to ignore it at first, told myself it was the wind playing tricks, or a tree groaning under the weight of ice. But the sound came again, and this time there was no mistaking it. Something was out there, something alive, something suffering. I pulled on my boots and coat, grabbed the flashlight, and fought my way outside. The cold hit me like a physical blow. The snow was waist-deep in places, the drifts even higher. The wind had died down to almost nothing, but the air was so cold it burned my lungs. I made it to the barn, checked the doors. They were fine, buried in snow, but secure. But the sound came again. Not from the barn, from beyond it, from the tree line. I swung the flashlight toward the forest. The beam caught something, a shape, dark against the snow, massive, unmoving. My first thought was a fallen tree. We'd lost plenty of branches in the storm, but as I moved closer, high-stepping through the drifts, the shape resolved into something else entirely. Something that made my heart stop. It was a body. Huge, covered in dark matted hair, lying on its side in the snow. Steam rose from it in thin wisps, ghostly in the beam of my flashlight. One arm was stretched out, fingers curled. The other was tucked beneath its massive torso. 20 feet away, I stopped. My breath came in short gasps. The smell hit me, wet fur, earth, musk, wild and ancient, but also the sharp metallic tang of blood. I took another step, then another. The beam of light played across the form, and I saw details that made my mind rebel. Broad shoulders, long, muscular arms, legs bent at the knees. The body was humanoid, but wrong. Too large, too powerful. The proportions of something that shouldn't exist. I moved around to see the face, and that's when I knew for certain what I was looking at. The face was flat, broad, covered in dark hair, but undeniably primate. The brow was heavy, the jaw pronounced. The eyes were closed, the mouth slightly open. Its chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. Each exhale released a small cloud of steam into the freezing air. "Jesus Christ," I whispered into the wind. It didn't respond, didn't move. I crouched down, keeping a few feet of distance, and played the light over its body more carefully. There was a wound on its side, a deep gash, like it had fallen onto something sharp or been struck by a falling branch. The blood had frozen in dark streams down its torso. The snow around it was stained pink, but what terrified me most was the color of its skin where I could see it. gray, almost blue, hypothermia. It was dying, right there in my yard. Bigfoot was dying. I stood there in the howling darkness, my mind racing through options. Call for help, but the phones were down, had been for 2 days. Drive to town. Impossible. The road was completely snowed in. Let nature take its course. I'd spent 15 years protecting wildlife. I couldn't do it. I couldn't just walk away. I ran back to the barn, found the old canvas tarp I used for hauling firewood, and dragged it through the snow to where the creature lay. Charlie had come out onto the porch and was barking, but he wouldn't come closer. He knew. Animals always know. I spread the tarp out beside the body and took a deep breath. This thing had to weigh 400 pounds, maybe more. I was 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, and not getting any younger. But I didn't have a choice. I positioned myself at its shoulders and pushed. The body rolled slightly. I pushed harder, throwing my weight into it, and managed to roll it onto the tarp. It made a sound, a low, agonized moan that cut right through me. But it didn't wake. I grabbed the corners of the tarp and pulled. The first few feet were the hardest. The canvas dug into my gloved hands. My boots slipped on the ice beneath the snow. My back screamed in protest. But I kept pulling, one step at a time, focusing only on the next foot of ground. It took me almost half an hour to drag it the 30 yards to the barn. By the time I got it inside, I was soaked with sweat, despite the freezing temperature. My shoulders felt like they'd been pulled from their sockets. But I'd done it. The creature was inside, out of the wind and snow. I pulled it into the center of the barn floor, onto a thick bed of old straw. Then I ran back to the cabin. Charlie was still on the porch, whining and pacing. I ignored him and grabbed everything I could think of. Every blanket in the house, the first aid kit, towels, a pot of warm water from the stove that I'd been keeping heated, rubbing alcohol, bandages, duct tape. When I came back to the barn, the creature hadn't moved. I set everything down and just looked at it for a moment, really looked at it. This was Bigfoot, an actual real Bigfoot, lying unconscious in my barn. The thing people spent their whole lives searching for, the thing I'd never believed in, and it was dying. I shook off the shock and got to work. I spread blankets over its body, tucking them around its limbs, covering everything except the wound. The creature was so cold, colder than anything living should be. I needed to warm it up, but slowly. Too fast and I could send it into shock. I set up my portable propane heater and positioned it carefully, angling the warmth toward the creature's core. Then I turned my attention to the wound. It was worse up close. The gash ran along its left side, just below the rib cage, maybe 8 inches long, and deep enough that I could see muscle tissue. The bleeding had mostly stopped. The cold had probably helped with that, but it needed to be cleaned and closed. I poured warm water over the wound, washing away the frozen blood and debris. The creature flinched but didn't wake. I used the rubbing alcohol next, dabbing it carefully into the wound with a clean towel. This time it made a sound, a low rumble deep in its chest, but its eyes stayed closed. I packed the wound with gauze, layer after layer, then wrapped it with an old towel and secured everything with duct tape. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold. It had to hold. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking from adrenaline and cold. I sat back against the barn wall and just watched the creature breathe. Each breath came a little easier than the last. The color was starting to return to its face, less gray, more of a dark tan beneath the hair. I must have sat there for 2 hours, maybe more. The heater hummed. The creature's breathing steadied. Outside, the storm finally began to break. The wind died to nothing. Snow continued to fall, but gently now, peacefully. At some point, I fell asleep, sitting up, my back against the rough wood of the barn wall, the shotgun across my lap, even though I knew I wouldn't use it. I woke to find its eyes open. Dark eyes, nearly black, watching me from across the barn. Intelligent eyes. Aware. There was no aggression in them, no fear really, just observation, assessment. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Neither of us moved. The moment stretched between us, fragile as glass. Then its eyes closed again, and it drifted back into sleep. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My heart was hammering. I'd just made eye contact with Bigfoot. It had looked at me, seen me, and chosen not to react with violence or fear. That had to mean something. I stood on shaking legs and checked the heater, still running, still warm. I adjusted the blankets, making sure the creature was fully covered. Then I went back to the cabin, let Charlie in, and made coffee with trembling hands. The sun was starting to rise. The storm had passed. The world outside was buried under 4 feet of fresh snow, pristine and white and absolutely silent. And in my barn, a creature that shouldn't exist was sleeping under my blankets, breathing steadily, healing. I sat at the kitchen table and tried to process what I'd done, what I was doing, what came next. I had no idea, but I knew I couldn't stop now. I spent that first full day moving between the cabin and the barn every hour. Each time I went out, I expected to find the creature gone, escaped, or worse, dead. But each time, it was still there, still breathing, still alive. By mid-morning, I realized I needed to think about food. What did Bigfoot eat? I had no idea. I assumed it was omnivorous based on what I'd read online over the years. Berries, roots, small game, maybe fish. I gathered what I had: apples, jerky, bread, peanut butter, some leftover venison from a deer my neighbor had given me. I arranged everything on a wooden crate and placed it near the creature's head, close enough that it could reach without having to move much. Then I retreated to the far side of the barn and waited. Around noon, it stirred. The eyes opened again, clearer this time, more focused. It lifted its head slightly, looked around the barn, then looked at me. We held eye contact for several seconds. I didn't move, didn't speak, just let it see that I wasn't a threat. Its gaze moved to the food. Slowly, with obvious effort, it reached out one massive hand and picked up an apple. The fingers were huge, thick, with dark nails that looked more like claws. But the movement was careful, almost delicate. It brought the apple to its mouth and bit into it. The sound of chewing filled the barn. It was the most normal, mundane sound, and yet hearing it come from a Bigfoot made it surreal. It ate 3 apples, most of the jerky, half the bread. Chewed slowly, deliberately. I watched every movement, cataloging details. The way its jaw worked, the way its throat moved when it swallowed, the very human-like way it used its hands. When it finished eating, it looked at the water bucket I'd left. I understood immediately. I picked up the bucket and brought it closer, setting it within reach. It dipped one hand in, cupped the water, and drank. Then again. 4 or 5 times before it seemed satisfied. It lay back down with a heavy sigh, and I could see the exhaustion in every line of its body. Eating had taken enormous effort. "You're going to be okay," I said quietly. My voice sounded strange in the silence of the barn. "You just need time." Its eyes found mine again, and I swear I saw understanding there. Maybe it didn't know my words, but it understood the tone, the intent. I stayed with it the rest of the day, kept the heater running, changed the bandage once when I saw blood seeping through. Brought more food and water. The creature slept most of the time, but every few hours it would wake, eat a little, drink, then sleep again. By evening, I knew it was going to survive. The color was better, the breathing was stronger. Whatever internal healing processes Bigfoot had, they were working. I brought my sleeping bag out and set up camp in the barn. I wasn't leaving it alone. Not yet. The second full day brought more progress. The creature was able to sit up on its own. I heard movement early in the morning and found it pushing itself upright, back against the barn wall. The effort was enormous. I could see the strain in its face, hear the labored breathing. But it managed. Sitting up, it was even more impressive. The shoulders were impossibly broad, the arms thick with muscle. Even injured and weakened, it radiated power. But there was something else too, a kind of dignity. Well, it didn't look like an animal. It looked noble, ancient. "Easy," I said, setting down the fresh water I'd brought. "Don't push too hard." It looked at me and made a sound, not a growl or roar, something softer, a low rumble that seemed to come from deep in its chest, almost like it was trying to communicate. I approached slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "I need to check the wound," I said, gesturing to its side. It watched me, but didn't move. I took that as permission. I knelt beside it and carefully peeled back the blanket and the bandage. The wound looked remarkably better. The edges were already starting to knit together. No sign of infection, no fresh bleeding. Whatever Bigfoot's physiology was, it healed faster than humans. I cleaned it again with warm water and antiseptic, applied fresh gauze, and rewrapped everything. The creature watched me the entire time. Those dark eyes followed every movement of my hands. When I finished and stepped back, it made that sound again, the low rumble, but this time it sounded different, grateful almost. Then it did something that stopped my heart. It reached out one massive hand and placed it on my shoulder. The weight was incredible. The hand was so large it covered my entire shoulder and part of my chest. The skin was rough, calloused, warm despite everything it had been through. We stayed like that for a long moment, the creature's hand on my shoulder, my eyes locked with its. I felt something shift in that moment. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was contact, real contact between two intelligent beings. This was trust. The hand lifted, and the creature settled back against the wall. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. I'd touched Bigfoot. Bigfoot had touched me, deliberately, purposefully. As a gesture of, what? Thanks? Recognition? Connection? All of the above, maybe. I spent the rest of the day sitting with it. I didn't talk much, didn't seem necessary, but I kept it company. Brought food when it seemed hungry, water when it needed it, adjusted the blankets, fed the heater. At one point it made a series of sounds, low hoots and rumbles, varying in pitch and rhythm, almost like speech, like it was trying to communicate something specific. I listened carefully, even though I couldn't understand. But I wanted it to know I was listening. "I wish I knew what you were saying," I told it. It looked at me for a long moment. Just then closed its eyes. Maybe that was enough. Maybe just being heard was what mattered. By late afternoon on the second day, it was strong enough to stand. I was refilling the water bucket when I heard movement behind me. I turned to find the creature rising slowly, one hand braced against the barn wall for support. It straightened to its full height, and my breath caught. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. The shoulders were broader than any human's, the chest deep and powerful. Standing upright like that, it looked almost human. Almost, but not quite. The proportions were just slightly off in ways that marked it as something else entirely. It took a tentative step, testing its weight on the injured side. There was a limp, pronounced but manageable. It could walk. That was good. But that meant the healing was progressing even faster than I'd hoped. It moved slowly across the barn to the door and looked out at the snow-covered yard. The sky was clear now, brilliant blue. Sunlight sparkled off the fresh snow like diamonds. The creature stood in the doorway, silhouetted against all that white brightness, and just looked. I wondered what it was thinking. Was it looking for others, assessing whether it was safe to leave, or just appreciating being alive? After a minute, it turned back to me, made eye contact. Then it moved back to its spot on the straw and lowered itself down carefully, It wasn't ready to leave yet, and somehow I was relieved. I brought more food. This time I included some raw vegetables I'd been saving, carrots, a potato, an onion. It ate the carrots but left the others. Interesting. I made a mental note. It had preferences. That evening, as the sun was setting and the barn filled with orange light, I made a decision. I pulled out my phone. The battery was low. I'd been charging it sparingly with the generator, but it had enough. I turned on the camera. The creature was lying on its side, the blankets draped over its body. The light caught the texture of its hair, the peaceful rise and fall of its breathing. I recorded for 30 seconds, panned slowly from its feet to its head, zoomed in on its face. The footage was clear, perfect, undeniable. I watched it back 3 times. This was proof. Real, concrete, scientific proof that Bigfoot existed. Researchers had spent decades searching for evidence this clear. And I had it, right here on my phone. I could change everything. Prove to the world that the stories were true. Make history. I sat there with my thumb hovering over the screen for a long time. Then I thought about what would happen next. The media would come, scientists, hunters, people with cameras and guns and tranquilizer darts. They'd tear through these woods looking for more. They'd set traps. They'd turn this forest into a circus. And this creature, this being that had trusted me enough to let me help it, to let me touch it, would be hunted, studied, possibly killed. I'd betrayed that trust by filming it at all. I pressed delete. The video disappeared. Gone. No backup, no cloud save, just gone. I felt sick about it, but I also felt certain. Some things were more important than proof. Some things were sacred. The 3rd day brought a change in the creature's behavior. It was more alert and more active. It sat up for longer periods, moved around the barn, testing its strength. The limp was still there, but improving hour by hour. I'd settled into a routine. Check the wound every morning, bring food and fresh water, keep the heater running, monitor its condition. It felt almost normal, this strange caretaking of a creature that shouldn't exist. Around midday, it did something unexpected. It picked up one of the empty apple crates and carried it to the corner of the barn. Then it picked up another and stacked it on top of the first. Then a third. It arranged them carefully, deliberately, into a neat stack. I watched, fascinated. This wasn't random. This was purposeful behavior. Organization, problem solving. When it finished, it turned to me and made a sound, that low rumble I was becoming familiar with. And then it gestured to the stack with one hand. "You like things organized?" I asked. It tilted its head slightly, watching me. I picked up a loose board that had been leaning against the wall and added it to the stack. The creature made a different sound, higher pitched. Pleased, maybe. We spent the next 20 minutes organizing the barn together. It would point to things, and I would move them or stack them according to some pattern only it understood. It was the strangest collaboration of my life, but also the most fascinating. This creature wasn't just intelligent. It had aesthetic preferences, a sense of order that implied a level of cognitive sophistication I hadn't expected. When we finished, the barn looked neater than it had in years. The creature made that pleased sound again and settled back onto the straw. It looked satisfied. I sat down across from it and just looked, really looked, at the shape of its face, the way its hands moved, the expressions that flickered across its features. This wasn't just an animal. This was a person. Different from me, yes, but a person nonetheless. "Where did you come from?" I asked quietly. "Are there more of you?" It watched me with those dark, intelligent eyes. Didn't answer, of course, but I felt like it understood the question. "I won't tell anyone," I said. "About you, about this? I promise." It reached out then and touched my hand. Just briefly, the lightest touch. Then it pulled back and closed its eyes. I sat there for a long time, looking at my hand where it had touched me. The gesture felt significant, like a pact, like we'd made a promise to each other. That evening, it stood again and walked to the barn door. The limp was barely noticeable now. It looked out at the forest, at the mountains in the distance. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and pink. I thought it would leave. Part of me expected it to just walk out into the forest and disappear. But it didn't. It looked back at me, made a soft sound, and returned to its spot on the straw. Not yet. It wasn't ready yet. Or maybe it was saying goodbye in stages, preparing both of us for the inevitable separation. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking up, checking to make sure it was still there. And every time it was, still breathing, still present, still here. The fourth morning, I woke to find it standing in the barn doorway, silhouetted against the early light. The sun was just coming up, painting the snow-covered yard in shades of pink and orange. It stood there perfectly still, looking out at the forest. I sat up in my sleeping bag and watched it. The limp was gone. It stood straight and tall, weight distributed evenly. It had healed, completely or close enough that it could survive out there. It was time. I stood and walked over to stand beside it. We looked out at the forest together, at the mountains, at the world that was its home. "You're ready," I said. It looked down at me, made a soft sound. Then it stepped out into the snow. I followed it out into the cold morning air. Charlie had come out onto the porch and was watching, quiet for once. The creature walked slowly across the yard toward the tree line. Every few steps it would pause and look around, remembering maybe, or saying goodbye. When at the edge of the trees, it stopped and turned back to me. We looked at each other across the 20 feet of snow between us. I raised my hand in a small wave. The creature raised its hand too, mirroring me. The gesture was so human, so familiar, that I felt my throat tighten. Then it made a sound, not the rumble I'd gotten used to, something different, a vocalization that rose and fell, almost musical. It sounded like language, like it was trying to tell me something. "I don't understand," I said, my voice rough, "but thank you for trusting me." It made the sound again. Then it placed one hand over its chest, right where the wound had been, and then extended that hand toward me. Palm out, fingers spread. I understood that. "Thank you," or maybe, "I trust you." I placed my hand over my own chest and extended it the same way. We stood like that for a moment, two beings separated by everything, species, language, worlds, but connected by something deeper than any of that. Then it turned and walked into the forest. I watched until I couldn't see it anymore, until it was just a shadow among shadows, and then nothing at all. The forest swallowed it completely, as if it had never been there. I stood in the snow for a long time after it disappeared. The sun climbed higher. The snow sparkled. Birds began to sing. Life went on. But everything felt different. The forest felt different. I felt different. I'd saved a life. Not just any life. Bigfoot's life. I'd touched something wild and ancient and rare, and I'd let it go. Protected its secret. Chosen silence over proof. I went back to the barn and cleaned up, folded the blankets, swept the straw. I put away the heater, erased every sign that something impossible had happened here. But I couldn't erase the memory, the weight of its hand on my shoulder, the intelligence in its eyes, the trust. That would stay with me forever. Later that day, I walked out to where it had disappeared into the trees. There were tracks in the snow, large, clear, unmistakable. 5 toes, deep impressions, heading north toward the higher elevations. I followed them for about 100 yards. Then they disappeared into rocky ground where the snow hadn't accumulated. Gone, like it had never been there. Except I knew better. I walked back to the cabin and started planning what to tell people when they asked about the storm. Nothing unusual, just a lot of snow. quiet few days, everything normal. The lies came easy, because the truth was mine to keep. Life went back to what passed for normal, or as normal as it could be after something like that. The snow melted over the next few weeks. The roads cleared. Power came back on. I returned to work, doing surveys and trail maintenance like nothing had happened. People in town talked about the storm, about the damage, about how lucky we'd been that no one got seriously hurt. I nodded along and kept my mouth shut. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I went into the forest, I looked for signs, footprints, broken branches, anything. I never found anything concrete. A few times I thought I heard sounds, distant calls that might have been Bigfoot or might have been wind through the canyons. I wanted to believe it was checking in, letting me know it was okay. Jim stopped by in early January. We sat on the porch, drinking coffee, watching the mountains. He looked tired, older somehow. "Lost another goat during the storm," he said. "Just gone. No tracks, nothing. It's the damnedest thing." I almost told him. The words were right there, pressing against my teeth. "I know what's taking your goats. I know what's out here. I saved one. I kept it alive in my barn. But I didn't, because once I said it, I couldn't take it back. And more importantly, it would put the creature at risk. People would start looking, hunting." "Probably a cougar," I said instead. "They get bold in winter." Jim nodded slowly. "Yeah, probably." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You hear anything strange during the storm? Sarah up on Ridge Road said she heard something. Said it sounded almost human, but not quite." My heart skipped. Wind does strange things in a storm. That's what I told her. Jim looked at me sideways. "You believe in any of that Bigfoot stuff, Owen?" I took a long drink of coffee, took my time answering. "I believe the woods are full of things we don't understand. Most of them are better left alone." Jim studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough." After he left, I went out to the barn and stood in the spot where the creature had lain. I could still see the slight depression in the straw where its body had been. The smell was long gone, but sometimes I thought I could catch a trace of it. Wet fur and earth and something wild. I thought about the footage I'd deleted. Part of me regretted it. That video could have changed everything, proven to the world that Bigfoot existed. Made me famous, maybe. Or at least believed. But most of me knew I'd made the right choice. That night I lay in bed and listened to the forest. No knocks, no calls. Just the usual sounds, wind in the pines, branches creaking, the distant hoot of an owl. But around 3 in the morning I heard something different. A low, resonant call from somewhere up on the ridge. It rose and fell in that musical pattern I'd heard when the creature left. The same vocalization. I got up and went to the window. The moon was bright, the yard silver with frost. I didn't see anything. But I knew it was still out there, still alive, still free. I raised my hand to the window in a small wave, just in case it could see me. The call came once more, softer, then silence. I went back to bed and slept better than I had in weeks. Spring came slowly that year. The snow melted in layers, revealing the brown earth beneath. The forest came alive again, birds returning, deer moving through, the creeks running high with meltwater. I kept working, kept living, but I felt different, lighter somehow, like I'd been given a gift I didn't deserve, but would cherish anyway. I started leaving offerings at the tree line where the creature had disappeared. Nothing obvious. Just an apple here, some jerky there, a loaf of bread wrapped in paper. In the morning, the food would be gone. No tracks, no signs. But I knew, or at least I wanted to believe I knew. One night in late March, I woke to a familiar sound, that low call, closer than before. I got up and went to the window. The moon was full, the yard bright and silver, and there, at the edge of the tree line, stood a shape, tall, broad, unmistakable. My breath caught. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, barefoot on the cold wood. We looked at each other across the distance. It raised one hand, slowly, deliberately. I raised mine back. We stood like that for maybe 30 seconds. Then it turned and walked into the forest, smooth and strong and whole. No limp, no hesitation, completely healed. It had come back, just to show me it was okay, to let me know the rescue had worked. I stood on the porch long after it disappeared, the cold biting at my feet, my heart full of something I couldn't name. Gratitude, maybe. Wonder. The overwhelming sense that I'd been part of something important, something sacred. I went back inside and sat by the fire. I didn't cry, but it was close. Relief and joy, and a kind of bittersweet ache, all mixed together. Over the following months, I'd catch glimpses occasionally. A shadow moving through the trees on my morning walks. A shape at dusk on the far ridge. Once, I found a pattern of stones stacked on the porch, 3 flat rocks balanced perfectly. I left them there for weeks until the weather knocked them over. I never tried to film it again, never tried to get closer or prove anything. This was between us, a quiet understanding, a trust that didn't need witnesses. People in town still talked about strange things in the woods, footprints, sounds, missing livestock. The ranger station got occasional reports. Fish and wildlife would investigate and find nothing conclusive. Probably bears, they'd say, or cougars, or people's imaginations. I'd listen and nod and keep my coffee warm, because I knew the truth. And the truth was better kept secret. In early summer, I got a transfer offer, a desk job closer to my daughter, better pay, easier work. Part of me wanted to say no. This cabin, this forest, it was where everything had happened, where I'd met Bigfoot, saved Bigfoot, connected with something wild and rare. But another part of me knew it was time. My daughter needed me closer, and maybe the creature needed me gone, needed fewer human eyes watching the forest. I accepted the transfer. The last night in the cabin, I sat on the porch and looked out at the forest. The sun was setting, painting the peaks orange and pink. Charlie lay beside me, old now, graying around the muzzle. We'd both changed that winter. I heard a sound from the tree line, that familiar low call. I stood and walked to the edge of the yard. It stepped out from the shadows. We looked at each other one last time. It walked toward me slowly, stopped about 10 feet away. Close enough that I could see every detail in the fading light. The dark hair, the intelligent eyes, the face that had become almost familiar. "I'm leaving," I said. My voice was rough. "I'm sorry." It made a sound, not sad exactly, just acknowledgement, understanding. Then it stepped forward, closed the distance between us, and placed both hands on my shoulders. The weight was immense but gentle. We stood like that, face to face, 2 beings from different worlds connected by an impossible winter. I reached up and placed my hands on its arms. The hair was coarse, the muscle beneath solid as stone. Warm, alive, real. "Thank you," I whispered, "for trusting me." It made that soft rumbling sound. Then it leaned forward slightly and touched its forehead to mine. Just for a moment, just long enough for me to feel the warmth of it, the reality of it. Then it stepped back, raised one hand in that now familiar gesture. I raised mine back. It turned and walked into the forest. I watched until I couldn't see it anymore, until it was just a memory in the gathering darkness. I stood there for a long time. Charlie came and sat beside me, and we watched the forest together as the stars came out. The next morning, I loaded the truck and drove away. Charlie sat beside me, looking out the window. I didn't look back. Couldn't. If I looked back, I might not leave. But I carried it with me. Every mile, every day after. The memory of that winter, the weight of its hands on my shoulders, the intelligence in its eyes, the trust. I'd saved Bigfoot's life, and in some way I still don't fully understand. Bigfoot had saved mine too. I live in town now, small place near my daughter. I work the desk job, file reports, answer phones. It's quiet, safe, the kind of life people understand. But late at night, when I can't sleep, I think about that winter, about the storm and the creature lying in the snow, about dragging it into my barn and spending 3 days keeping it alive, about the moment it placed its hand on my shoulder and trusted me completely. I think about the footage I deleted. Sometimes I regret it. Most times I don't. Because what I had with Bigfoot wasn't meant to be shared. It was a private thing. Sacred, almost. A secret between me and the forest. People ask me sometimes if I believe in Bigfoot. I usually laugh and change the subject. Once my daughter asked me directly, "Dad, you worked in the woods forever. Did you ever see anything weird?" I looked at her for a long moment. Then I smiled and said, "Just a lot of trees." She rolled her eyes and let it drop. I keep the secret safe, for the creature, for myself, for the magic of it. Some nights I swear I hear it, a low call in the distance, like something remembering. I know it's just my mind playing tricks, but it feels real enough. I don't have any mementos. No photos, no video, nothing physical, just the memory. But that's enough. Because in a world that gets smaller every day, colder every year, I got to do something that mattered. I got to protect something wild and rare and good. I got to save Bigfoot. And Bigfoot, in its own way, saved me too. That's worth more than any proof.